The thing about forward operating bases in the Kandahar province is that they smell like burnt plastic and old sweat and something underneath both of those things that nobody ever names out loud. You learn to breathe through your mouth the first week. By the second week, you stop noticing. By month 4, you stop noticing a lot of things. I noticed Reyes on day 1. Hard not to. She was the only woman in Charlie Company's 3rd platoon, and she walked like someone had once told her she had no business walking at all chin level, boots hitting gravel in that deliberate way that isn't aggression but is close enough to it that most people step aside anyway. She was built compact. Economical. The way a fixed-blade knife is compact. Nothing wasted. Sergeant Dunn noticed her differently. It started the way things like that always start small. Stupid. We'd been in country 11 weeks. The mission tempo had been grinding 3 patrols in 5 days, the last one stretching 14 hours through wadis that wanted to swallow you whole, and everyone was running on Murray coffee and bad tempers. FOB Lindsay was a rectangle of HESCO barriers and plywood and borrowed time, and it had the energy of a pressure cooker with the relief valve rusted shut. The pull-up bar was bolted to a post between the motor pool and the latrine. Somebody had welded it there in 2009 and it had outlasted 4 rotations. It was the closest thing we had to entertainment that didn't involve a bootleg hard drive and somebody's stolen Wi-Fi. Reyes was on it when Dunn came around the corner. She wasn't performing anything. Wasn't counting loud. Wasn't looking at anyone. She had her hands wrapped, thumbs hooked over the bar in a false grip, and she was moving through slow, controlled reps the way you do when the goal isn't a number but a feeling when you're working something out of your body that doesn't have a name yet. I was sitting on a Jersey barrier 8 feet away with a boot in my lap and a cleaning kit going nowhere in particular, watching without meaning to. Dunn had 3 guys with him. Hensley, Marsh, and the new kid, Tober, who'd been at Lindsay 6 days and still looked like he was auditioning for a role he'd been given the wrong script for. "Look at that," Dunn said. Not to anyone. To the air. Reyes pulled up. Held it. Came down clean. "How many's that?" Marsh said. "Who's counting?" Hensley said. Dunn watched her for another 2-3 reps. There was something in his face that I didn't have a word for yet. Something that wasn't admiration and wasn't hatred but was in the territory between them, the territory where men put things they don't know how to hold. "Reyes," he said. She came down. Didn't turn yet. "Reyes." She turned. Her face was blank in that particular way that is not blankness at all but is instead a wall you have decided to build in real time, brick by brick, while someone is watching. "Sergeant. How many you at?" "Lost count." That was a lie. We both knew it. She had been counting since the first one, in the back of her head where she kept everything she wasn't going to give him. Dunn smiled. It didn't reach the parts of his face that smiles are supposed to reach. "You know what your problem is?" She waited. "You got the right muscles in the wrong order. Upper body like that on a woman, you're compensating." He looked at Hensley. "That's a compensation pattern. They train themselves for the PT test and then they can't hack it when it's 110 and you're carrying a casualty up a ridgeline." Hensley laughed. Marsh laughed because Hensley did. Tober looked at the ground. Reyes said nothing. That was the wrong thing for her to do. Silence, when a man like Dunn is performing for an audience, reads as contempt. He wanted a reaction. Embarrassment would do. Anger was even better. What he got was nothing, and nothing made the performance collapse, and the collapse needed somewhere to go. "You hear me?" "I heard you, Sergeant." "You got something to say?" "No, Sergeant." He looked at her for a long 3 seconds. Then, he walked over and took the bar with one hand, a casual, proprietary gesture, like straightening a picture frame in your own living room, and he shook it. "This bar's been here since before you were somebody's idea," he said. 50 guys rotated through this FOB and not one of them needed to prove anything on it. He let it go. "Finish up." He walked away. His guys followed.
Reyes turned back to the bar. She did 12 more reps, I counted every one of them.
Her name was Corporal Elena Reyes.
23 years old.
San Antonio, Texas, which she told you the way people tell you the name of a place they love and have complicated feelings about, like it raised you well and didn't entirely prepare you for what came next.
She'd enlisted at 19. One deployment to Djibouti before this one.
Military intelligence by training, attached to our platoon as a linguist, Pashto, functional Dari, some Urdu she'd picked up in a year of what she called aggressive self-study. She was the reason Captain Alvarado could have a conversation with village elders that didn't end in someone's feelings getting scraped off the floor. She sat with us at chow. Not every night, but enough nights that her absence was a thing you noticed. She talked mostly to Corporal Webb, who was from McAllen and, thus a neighboring nation in her personal geography. She ate like someone who had been taught that finishing your plate was a form of respect and had decided to agree with that teaching. She never talked about home the way the rest of us talked about home, the way that was really just a form of counting down. What she talked about, when she talked, was the work. The patterns in the intelligence reports. The way certain phrases in Pashto carry two meanings depending on the stress, how the wrong ear in a conversation could turn a warning into an invitation. She had an eidetic memory for voices. She'd told Webb once that she could hear a man's accent and place him within 30 kilometers of his home village, and Webb had said that's a superpower and she'd said it's a tool and then corrected herself, it's the only tool I've got, so I treat it like a superpower. I hadn't been close enough to hear that conversation. Webb told me about it afterward. Webb told me a lot of things about Reyes. I told myself I was just listening because Webb talked too much and I was polite.
The mission brief came on a Thursday. 3 hours.
Pre-dawn push to a compound 6 clicks southwest, in a district that the intelligence overlay described as contested in the way that a wound is described as complicated, technically accurate, practically useless. There was a HVT somewhere in the associated network. There was a house. There were 2 approaches. There was the part of every brief where the S2 officer says the situation on the ground may differ from current reporting and everybody in the room does the translation in their heads, we don't actually know what's in there.
Reyes would be with the element. She went wherever the potential for communication went. That was the job. I watched her during the brief.
She was in the second row, notebook open, pen moving in small tight strokes. When the S2 officer walked through the known inhabitants, compound owner, approximate age 50, one adult male son, laborers, she stopped writing and looked up.
Just for a second. Then, back down. I didn't know what she'd noticed. I'd find out in 6 hours. The desert at 0300 is a different animal than the desert at noon. Noon is hostility made physical, direct, confrontational, take it or leave it. 0300 is the desert being honest with you. Cold that has real opinions about whether you belong there. Stars that are not romantic but are instead just indifferent. The ground under your boots either soft enough to swallow sound or hard enough to broadcast it, and nothing in between, and you never know which until you're already moving. We moved in 2 files. 12 personnel total. Dunn had the lead element. I was third in the trail element, which put me 6 boots behind Reyes for the entire movement. She moved well.
That's the only word for it, well, in the way that means efficient without being mechanical, aware without being anxious. She carried her kit like it had always been there. The weight didn't change her gait. The dark didn't change her pace. Dunn had looked at her in the staging area the way he'd looked at the pull-up bar. Like she was an argument he hadn't finished winning. We were 400 meters out when she touched Webb's arm. Light touch. 2 fingers. He stopped. She leaned in. I was close enough to catch it, the satellite pattern on the eastern wall is wrong. Webb blinked. Come again? The thermal in the brief, there were 4 distinct signatures in the main structure. But, the architecture on the overlay shows 3 rooms. For heat signatures in 3 rooms reads normal. She paused. Unless the 4th signature is in the wall space. Between the exterior and interior. Webb looked at her. There's someone in the wall, she said.
They've done this before. That's a prepared position. Webb keyed the radio immediately.
Dunn's voice came back fast and low and carrying that particular flavor of irritation that lives in men who have been interrupted mid-certainty.
Reyes is reading overhead imagery again, he said. She's a linguist, not an analyst.
Sergeant, they keep the element moving.
We are on timeline. Webb looked at Reyes.
She looked at the compound.
He's going to get someone shot, she said.
Very quiet. Not to Webb specifically.
To the air.
Then, she kept moving, because that was the job, because you move or you don't move and there is no third option at 0306 clicks from the wire. What happened next I am going to tell you the way I remember it, which means in pieces. The breach went clean. First door, first room, nothing but low furniture and the smell of cardamom and sleep. Dunn's voice on the net, first room clear. Second room, a narrow corridor, 2 men face down before they were even entirely awake, zip cuffs, flex cuffs, nobody hurt.
Third room, nothing. Then, the wall moved. Not the whole wall. A section.
A rectangle of it, shoulder width, that swung out from the interior face and became a door, and the person who came through it came through fast and low with something in his hands that my brain processed in the wrong order, shape before function, function before intention, and the intention was bad. The shot was Reyes.
1 round.
She was the closest. She was the closest because she'd known where to stand. After, when things got quiet the way things get quiet after gunfire in an enclosed space, the total silence that is actually your ears staging a protest, I found her against the interior wall, back flat against the plaster, breathing in a measured way that I recognized as a decision. She was looking at the floor. Her hands were still up.
Not shaking.
Dunn was standing in the doorway to the third room.
He didn't say anything for a long time.
Then, he said, "You called it."
Reyes didn't look up.
"Yes, Sergeant."
Another long silence. "Good catch." She said nothing.
Because there was nothing to say that was safe to say, and she knew that, and she said nothing, and the silence was its own kind of answer.
I thought about the pull-up bar. About the way she'd done 12 more reps after he'd walked away. I thought, she's been building for this. Not this room. This moment.
The moment when it costs them something to underestimate her. I thought, she knew this was coming and she got ready for it anyway. The third room smelled like gun oil and old fear and something almost like cardamom underneath, and we held the compound for 47 minutes, and then we walked back 6 clicks in a desert that was starting to consider the idea of dawn, and nobody said much, and Reyes walked second in file, and her boots hit the gravel the same way they always hit it. Deliberate. Like she'd decided. Nobody said good job in the way it needed to be said. That's the thing I kept coming back to, in the days after the compound. Dunn had said good catch in the third room, which was, if you're being precise about it, the bare minimum a person in his position could offer without it becoming an official thing, without it having weight, without it costing him anything in front of the men. 2 words that acknowledged the fact without acknowledging what the fact meant. What the fact meant was, she'd been right and he'd been wrong, and his being wrong had nearly put a round through somebody in his element, and the only reason it hadn't was her. Good catch. Like she'd snagged his keys before they hit the floor. I watched the platoon in the days after. It was subtle, the way these things always are, the way weather is subtle, the way you don't notice the temperature dropping until your hands are already cold. Marsh stopped laughing when Dunn said something about Reyes. Tober started making room for her at the planning table, not conspicuously, just moving half a step, the way you make room for someone you've decided deserves to occupy space. Webb didn't change. Webb had always been easy with her. But something in the way the others sat when she sat, or stopped talking when she talked, had shifted. The only one who hadn't shifted was Dunn. She told me about San Antonio on a night 12 days after the compound. I don't know how it started. I know we were both awake at 0130 because neither of us could sleep, and the choice at 0130 was either stare at the plywood ceiling or go sit outside on the HESCO barrier with the bugs and the dark and some version of peace. We'd made the same choice independently and arrived at the same barrier simultaneously, which struck us both as funny in the thin, exhausted way that things strike you as funny after you've been running on 4 hours a night for 3 weeks. She had instant coffee from a care package. I had a protein bar I'd been saving for no reason. We split both. My brother was Army, she said. Not looking at me. Looking out at the wire, where the guard tower was a dark shape against a slightly lighter dark. Was? He got out. 4 years. He's doing HVAC now in Corpus Christi. A pause. He thinks I'm on a base somewhere filing reports. You let him think that? My mom knows the truth. She doesn't sleep well either way. She picked a piece of the protein bar apart without eating it. My brother would have shown up at MEPS and tried to physically prevent me from enlisting if he'd known what I was actually signing up for. Would he have stopped you? She looked at me for the first time. The expression on her face was something I would spend a long time trying to find a word for. Not quite amusement, not quite sadness, something that lived in the exact center of both. I'm here, she said. Which was not an answer to the question I'd asked and was entirely an answer to the question I'd asked. The following week, Dunn did the thing. I've thought about it a lot since. Whether it was deliberate, whether it was some ambient thing that happened because he didn't stop himself from doing it, or whether it was something in between, a thing he wanted to do that he gave himself permission for because he'd never developed the habit of not giving himself that permission. We were running a joint patrol with the ANA element assigned to our sector. Village engagement. 3 stops: a school in construction, a district sub-governor's office, a shura with local farmers about the road improvement project that had been promised in 4 previous rotations and completed in none of them. Translation heavy. Which meant Reyes was essential in the way that essential is the right word. Without her, none of it happened. The sub-governor's meeting was the 3rd stop. The room was a long narrow space with cushions on the floor and a window that let in a bar of afternoon light that hit the dust and turned gold. There were 7 men from the district leadership and 4 of us: Dunn, me, Lieutenant Cole, and Reyes. The sub-governor was speaking quickly, and there was something in his pashto that was a particular register, formal but not official, the register of a man saying something that he wants recorded but doesn't want to be seen saying, and Reyes was leaning slightly forward the way she did when she was working, when she was pulling the meaning out of the space between the words, and she started translating in that low consecutive murmur that she'd explained to me once: you don't interrupt. You hold it, and then you deliver it whole. Dunn interrupted her. Not the sub-governor. Horror. Mid-sentence, she was delivering a paragraph about water access disputes along the canal, and Dunn said, "Hold on," and asked Cole a question about the ANA positioning outside. A logistical question. Not urgent. The kind of thing that has 100 right moments to ask, and this was none of them. The sub-governor watched. The district men watched. The bar of gold light moved. Reyes stopped. Waited. Answered the question when it circled back to her, Cole redirecting, saying, "Reyes, can you catch us up?" And she restarted without visible disruption, the paragraph intact in her head where nothing leaked, and she delivered it, and the meeting continued. In the vehicle on the way back, she didn't say anything. I watched her from across the Humvee. Her face was the wall again. The one she built while you watched, the way you watch someone put up a fence post, efficient, practiced, and, when it's done, you cannot see through it. Her hands were in her lap. They were still. I thought about what it costs to be still when everything in you wants to be otherwise. I don't know who started the thing with the weight plates. I think it was Marsh. I think it started as a bet, Marsh saying something to Hensley, the number climbing and the way numbers climb when men are performing for each other, and then it became a thing that had its own momentum, the way these things do. The pull-up bar had been replaced by the plywood room and the back of the motor pool that someone had started calling the gym, which was a generous word for 4 mismatched plates, a curl bar, and a bench that needed shimming. The weight was 185 pounds. On the bar. Clean and press from floor to overhead. Hensley had done it. Marsh had come close. The new kid Tober hadn't tried, and wasn't being pressured to, because Tober was beginning to demonstrate a competence that was earning him the right to decline certain performances.
Dunn hadn't tried.
But he'd been the one who told Marsh, when Marsh was failing on the third attempt, to keep those elbows up, the coaching posture, the man who doesn't need to compete because he is above competing.
Reyes had watched from the doorway for about 45 seconds.
That was how long it took Dunn to notice her.
"You got something to contribute," he said. "Just watching. Watching doesn't count as PT." She looked at the bar.
She looked at it the way she looked at a Pashto transcript, like she was already somewhere inside it, doing calculations that showed on her face as stillness.
"Can I try?" she said. The room had 4 people in it. It got quieter than 4 people.
"That's 185 pounds, Dunn said.
"I know what it is." The pause. Long. The kind that's a test disguised as a pause. "Knock yourself out," he said. She chalked her hands from the block on the floor.
She approached the bar and stood over it in the way that told me she'd done this before, feet hip width, the bar over her midfoot, not her toes. She gripped it and let the weight settle into her hands before she pulled, feeling it, and then her hips dropped and her chest came up and she pulled and the bar came off the floor. The first phase, deadlift to hang, was clean. She transitioned to the power clean. Hips, then pull, then the catch, elbows whipping under as the bar landed on her clavicles and she caught it in a quarter squat and stood it up. Then the press. She breathed. 1 breath. She drove up and the bar went overhead and her arms locked out and she stood there for a long second under 185 pounds with her chin tipped back slightly and her eyes on the plywood ceiling. Then she brought it down and set it on the floor the same way she'd picked it up, controlled, intentional, nothing wasted. She stood up. The room was still quiet. Dunn was looking at the bar. Not at her. At the bar, like it had done something that required explanation. Then he looked at her, and, for the first time in the weeks I'd been watching this thing between them, I saw something in his face that wasn't performance. Wasn't audience directed. Was just there. He didn't say anything. She picked up her water bottle from the floor. She walked out. I followed her with my eyes until she was through the door and into the afternoon sun, and then I looked back at Dunn, and his face had closed again. Back to the thing he wore. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the 2 seconds where he hadn't known what to do with what he'd just watched. The 2 seconds where everything he decided about her had needed to reorganize itself around evidence that didn't fit. Good catch was going to be insufficient this time. There was nothing to say. So he didn't say anything. Which is its own kind of answer. Webb found me that evening on the same HESCO barrier, which was becoming a location with a history. "You know what her max is," he said. "On the clean and press?" 210. He said it the way you say a number that makes an argument without needing any words around it. "She went easy today." I looked at the wire. "She went easy," I said. "She didn't want to embarrass him in front of his guys," Webb said. She told me this, she said there's a difference between proving something and proving something you can't take back." He paused. "I don't know what that means exactly." I thought I did. She knew that Dunn needed to be survivable. If she'd put 210 over her head in that room, there was no version of the rest of this deployment where he didn't become dangerous to her, not physically, but in the 1,000 small ways that authority becomes dangerous when it's been publicly humiliated. She'd given him 185. She'd let him keep something. That was the calculation. That was what she was doing in the 2 seconds before she chalked her hands. Not "can I lift this? How much can I lift and still be safe here?" I sat with that for a long time. 3 days later, the radio call came in at 0840. Contact. 2 clicks north. A&A element caught in a wadi, 1 Kia, 3 WIA, vehicle disabled. The platoon was the QRF. We were rolling in 9 minutes. The wadi was a feature I knew from the map and, from 2 previous patrols, a dry riverbed with walls that ranged from 3 to 8 feet, which meant cover for us and cover for anyone shooting at us, which meant it was a place that made the decision for you once you were in it. You committed to the depth and, then, you worked your way out. The ANA survivors were at the vehicle. 2 walking wounded, 1 litter. The Kia, a young sergeant whose name I learned later, Zabihullah, 26 years old, a father twice over, from Helmand province, was already bagged when we arrived. The litter casualty had a femur fracture and a tourniquet that someone had applied correctly, which told you something about the training that had taken in this element. The threat was across the wadi, elevated, in the rocks on the north face. The extraction problem was the vehicle. Disabled, blocking the one exit wide enough for our Humvees. We had to get it moved or we had to carry the litter casualty out on foot across 300 meters of open wadi floor that was getting intermittent attention from the north. Dunn was on the radio with Cole. Cole was a half-click back, holding the vehicles. Reyes was next to me in the wadi, behind the wheel well of the disabled ANA Ford Ranger, watching the north face through a gap between the vehicle and the wall. "There are 2, she said. 2 positions or 2 shooters?" "2 shooters. 1 position." She was very still. "I can hear them. One's shifting. That's a reload pattern." I looked at her. "They're talking to each other," she said. "I can hear it. They're going to move." "Move where?" "East. Along the rocks. They want a better angle on the vehicle." She turned to look at me. Full look, direct, no wall. "We have maybe 90 seconds. I keyed the radio and said what she'd told me. Dunn said, "How confident is she?" "Very," I said. 30-second pause. "Tell her if she's wrong, we're going to have a problem." I didn't tell her that. I didn't tell her anything. She'd already heard it, because the radio volume was what it was and we were standing 18 inches apart. She turned back to the gap. 60 seconds, she said. "They'll be at the rock shelf at the bend. That's the angle they want. That's where they'll appear." I pulled Webb over. I told him. He told Hensley. Hensley repositioned. At 53 seconds, I know because I was counting, 2 figures came around the bend at the rock shelf on the north face, moving fast with their heads down, and Hensley and Webb were already there, already waiting, and the engagement was 4 seconds long and then it was done and the wadi was quiet except for the ringing and the wind. We extracted the litter casualty in 8 minutes. Cole's Humvees met us at the wadi mouth. The disabled Ranger we'd pushed by hand, 6 of us, enough to clear the exit. On the drive back, Dunn rode in the lead vehicle. I was in the second one, across from Reyes. She had her eyes closed. Not sleeping. Breathing. Her hands in her lap. Still. At some point the vehicle hit a washboard section of road and the vibration moved through everything and I watched her hands and, for just 1 second, I saw her fingers press against her thighs. Hard. Like she was holding something down. Then, they relaxed. Then, she was still again. I looked out the window at the desert going by. I thought, she does this every time. She holds it until she's somewhere she can let it go, and then, she lets it go in the smallest possible motion where nobody's looking. I thought, nobody sees this. And, I thought, I'm looking, and she knows it, and she let me anyway. That night Dunn came to where she was sitting outside after chow. He stood next to her for a moment. Said nothing. She said nothing. Then, he sat down. 2 grown people on a concrete barrier in the dark in Afghanistan. He said, "That was good work today." Not good catch. Good work. She said, "Thank you, Sergeant." He sat there for another 30 seconds. Then, he stood and went inside. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to an apology. It was, I don't know. The minimum motion of a man who has realized, somewhere slow and private, that the model he's been using is wrong, and who isn't ready to say that out loud, and who maybe never will be. But, he sat down. In the dark. Next to her. And said the right words in the wrong order, and that was what he had.
She sat there after he left, looking at the wire. Her face was not the wall. For a few minutes, in the dark, when she didn't know I was watching from across the motor pool, her face was just a face. Young. Tired. Here. There's a thing that happens near the end of a deployment that nobody prepares you for. You've spent 7, 8, 9 months learning the specific grammar of a place where the road bends wrong, which village elder speaks with his hands when he's nervous, what the quality of silence sounds like before something happens versus after. You've learned to read the atmosphere the way you read text, and then, suddenly, you're inside the last 30 days and the knowledge starts feeling like ballast. Something you'll have to put down. The countdown that was once too long is now too short, and the inside of your head does something uncomfortable. It starts saying goodbye to things that don't know you're leaving. I started noticing the stars differently around day 140. Reyes started cleaning her kit more carefully. Not obsessively. Just thoroughly. With the attention of someone who's deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The last significant thing happened on day 151. 14 days out. We had a village meeting scheduled in the district center. Ashura, the real kind, the kind that takes 3 hours and 14 cups of tea and moves at the speed of legitimacy, being rebuilt one slow exchange at a time. Reyes had been preparing for this one for a week. She had notes. She had the names of every man who would be present, their tribal affiliations, the specific words in Pashto that carried different weight depending on who you were and who you were speaking to. She'd told me, the night before, that there were 2 men in that room who had been on opposite sides of a land dispute that was older than most of our platoon, and that the way she translated a single phrase from the ANA commander could either inflame it or give both men a reason to set it down. 1 phrase, I'd said. Maybe 2. She'd shrugged. Language is a minefield. You step in the same place as everyone else steps and you're fine. You go sideways and something old goes off. I'd thought about that for a long time after she said it. The Shura room was in the district center, a building that had been a school, then a government office, then nothing for 3 years, then something again. The walls were whitewashed and the whitewash was the kind of white that has a memory of every other color it's covered. Cushions on the floor in a rectangle. The ceiling fan turned without conviction. 14 men from the district. Cole, Dunn, and 4 others from our element. Reyes. And a man named Haydari, who was the ANA civil affairs officer for the sector and who, in the 7 weeks I'd watched him work alongside Reyes, had never quite figured out whether to treat her as a colleague or a subordinate or some third thing that his frame of reference didn't have a slot for. He'd settled on interrupting her. Not always. Just enough. When her interpretation was going long, when the elder being translated had offered something complex and she was working it into English without losing the shape of it, Haydari would sometimes interject. Not translate over her, just redirect. A word, a hand gesture, a choice to address the Americans directly in his limited English, as if demonstrating that the translation step wasn't necessary. She'd adapted to it. She was good at adapting. Today she didn't adapt. Halfway through the 2nd hour, the older of the 2 men with the land dispute, his name was Haji Mirwais, 60-something, with a white beard cut flat at the bottom like a decision, said something that Reyes recognized as important. I could tell because her pen stopped moving. She leaned slightly forward. She began to translate. He's saying that the agreement his father signed was witnessed by a government representative from Kabul. That the document exists. That the existence of the document is being ignored not because it was lost but because Haydari said something in Dari to the room. Fast. Cole looked at him. Cole looked at Reyes. What did he say? Cole asked her. He told the room that the translation would proceed through him directly, Reyes said. Her voice was level. That's not accurate. And the word he used for my position, it translates closer to assistant than interpreter. The room had gone very still. Haji Mirwais was watching Reyes. His eyes were patient in the way that old eyes get patient, past urgency, past impatience, arrive somewhere long and slow on the other side of both. Reyes looked at Cole. Cole looked at Dunn. There was a conversation in that look. I'd been in enough rooms to read it. This is your call. This is the thing where you either back her or you don't, and either way you've made a decision about what this is. Dunn said, in a voice that was not loud but had load-bearing quality to it, the voice of a man who was putting something down permanently. Captain Reyes is the qualified interpreter for this element. She will conduct the full translation. That's how we're running this. Cole nodded. Said it to Haydari in English, formal and clear. Haydari's face did something complicated. Then, it went neutral. He nodded once. Reyes turned back to the room. Her voice, when she resumed, was the same as it had been, the same register, the same precision, the same careful architecture of meaning crossing from one language to another without losing its structural integrity. Haji Mirwais watched her translate his words into English. When she finished, he looked at Cole, and then he looked back at Reyes, and he said something short and quiet that wasn't addressed to the room but to her specifically. She heard it. Something in her face moved. Cole said, "What was that?" He said. She paused. "A half-beat." He said his daughter is studying for her teaching certificate in Mazar-i-Sharif. He said she has good language also. A pause. He said some tools take time to be recognized. The ceiling fan turned. The afternoon light came in low and yellow through the high window. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then, the meeting continued. On the walk back to the vehicles I ended up beside Dunn. Not intentionally. Just the geometry of movement through the district center's outer courtyard. He was looking at the ground. That particular look, not downcast, not distracted, just looking at the ground the way you look at a problem you're revising. I said, that was the right call in there. He didn't answer for a few steps. Should have been the first call, he said. Months ago. I didn't have anything to add to that. Neither did he. We kept walking. Behind us, I could hear Reyes talking to Webb in a low voice. Something about the land dispute, about the document Haji Mirwais had mentioned, about the possibility that if they could verify it through the legal affairs channel they might actually give these two old men a resolution to something that had been eating at their families for 40 years. Her voice had a quality in it that I hadn't heard much, an energy that wasn't performance, wasn't professionalism, was just engagement. She was interested. She was actually interested in the specific small mechanism by which one piece of work done correctly might resolve one ancient fracture between two men who'd been pulling in opposite directions across a piece of land neither of them had visited in years. That's a language too, I thought. The language of caring what happens to the specific thing in front of you. 12 days left. FOB Lindsay held a going-away ceremony for a different reason that week. Specialist Aaron Tober was getting a commendation for the action at the Wadi, which was deserved and also slightly absurd to Tober, who kept trying to attribute the outcome to Reyes's call and kept being told, in the patient bureaucratic language of these things, that the commendation covered his actions specifically and that he should accept it graciously. He did. But, at the small gathering in the dining facility afterward, nothing formal, just the platoon and some coffee and some of Webb's contraband shortbread that had arrived in a box from his mother in McAllen. Tober stood up and said he wanted to say something. He was 20 years old and from outside Cincinnati, and he still sometimes looked like he'd been given the wrong script, but in this moment he looked like a kid who'd decided to do a thing before he could talk himself out of it. He said, "I know what the paperwork says. But what actually happened at the Wadi started with Reyes hearing something I didn't hear and telling us where to be. So." He raised his cup of terrible coffee. "Reyes," he said. She was across the table from him. She looked at her coffee cup. Then, she looked up at Tober. "You kept your elbow up," she said. He blinked. "On what?" "On the reload. I saw it from the Wadi floor. Textbook." He looked like he might die. In a good way. In the way that young men look when they've been seen accurately by someone they respect. Around the table, cups went up. Not everybody. But, most of them. Dunn's went up. Last. But, up. On the final night, I found her at the Hesco barrier for the third time. I'd stopped being surprised by this.
It was our spot now. The way places become yours not because you claimed them but because you kept returning.
The stars were the kind that make you feel the distance rather than the beauty. The wire was dark. The FOB was quiet in the way that a place gets quiet when it knows you're leaving or when you know you are, which amounts to the same thing. "What are you taking home?" she said. She'd asked me this before, months ago, in a different way, as a logistical question. This time it meant something else. I thought about it. "The sky looks different over here," I said. "I don't know how to explain it. I'll keep looking at the sky at home and trying to figure out what's different." "It's the same sky." "I know." She looked at it anyway. I did too. "I'm taking the land dispute," she said. Haji Mirwais. "I'm going to spend the first 6 months back trying to locate the document through the legal affairs channel. My Pashto's not going to disappear because I flew home." A pause. One of the elders gave me his son's contact information in Kabul. "The son is a lawyer." "You think you can actually? I think I can try." "Which is the same thing as actually, if you commit to it." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I take languages home," she said. "The words I learned here. The way certain phrases land differently in certain ears. I'll take that." "The work," I said. "Yeah." A pause. "The work." We sat there for a while. Not talking. The kind of comfortable silence that you earn that requires enough time, enough shared experience, enough mutual survival to arrive at. Then, she said, "You should know that I heard everything Dunn said about me. In the first weeks. The pull-up bar, the compound brief, the meeting with the sub-governor. All of it." "I know," I said. "I need you to know that I was never," it wasn't, she stopped. Started again. "It would have been easier to be angry. I know how to be angry. Anger is a clean thing. It has a direction." She looked at the wire. "But, I couldn't afford clean. I needed the job done. I needed Haji Mirwais to get his document heard. I needed Tober to keep his elbow up." A pause. Anger was a luxury I didn't have. I thought about what she'd said in the motor pool. There's a difference between proving something and proving something you can't take back. "Were you ever scared?" I said. The question came out more honest than I intended. Too direct. The kind of thing you ask at 0100 when your filter has run down. She thought about it for longer than I expected. "In the third room," she said. "After. Not during. During is all mechanism, you're running on procedure and training. After is when your body catches up to what just happened." She looked at her hands. "In the vehicle on the way back, yeah. I sat there for 6 clicks and ran through it and felt what I hadn't felt during." "In the wadi?" "Same." She was quiet. "Fear is always late to the thing. It shows up after. Is that good or bad? It's just how it works." She finished her coffee. "If I'd been afraid during, I wouldn't have heard them. I needed quiet inside to hear the outside clearly." She looked at me. "I think that's what they couldn't figure out. Done, some of the others. They thought, I don't know. That composed meant unbothered. That discipline meant nothing was happening underneath it." She shook her head. "Everything was happening underneath it. I just had a job to do." I held that. "He sat down," I said. "Done. That night after the wadi." "I know. Is that enough?" She thought about it for a long time. The wind moved across the barrier and she pushed her hair back from her face and let it settle. "It's what there is," she said. "Enough is a different question." She stood up. "I'm going to sleep. We've got 0500 transport muster." She picked up her cup. She looked out at the wire one more time, the way you look at something you're deciding whether to miss. "Hey," I said. She looked back. "That man in the Shura. Haji Mirwais." I paused.
Some tools take time to be recognized.
She looked at me. Yeah, she said. They do. Then, she went inside.
The transport convoy left FOB Lindsay at 0537. 14 vehicles. 104 soldiers. The desert was still cold and the sky was that specific color that exists only between the last of the dark and the first of the actual light, not purple, not gray, something without a name. I was 6 vehicles back from Reyes. I couldn't see her. But I knew she was there, probably with her notebook open, probably working something out, a word, a phrase, a thread of a conversation that would eventually lead her to a lawyer's office in Kabul and an old man's document and, maybe, the resolution of one 40-year argument across a piece of land that 2 families had been paying for in grief. Or maybe it wouldn't work out. Maybe the document was lost or the lawyer was unreachable or the bureaucracy was impenetrable, as it usually is. Maybe all of it amounted to nothing, in the way that so much of what we did there amounted to nothing that you could measure. But she would try. I knew that. She would carry it home the way she carried everything, in the smallest possible space, with the minimum of waste, in the careful arrangement of someone who has decided that the work is worth doing even when nobody's watching, even when nobody says the right thing at the right time, even when the recognition comes late and incomplete and smells a little like good catch. She would try because she was a tool, the word she'd used, the word she'd meant as precision, not diminishment, built for a purpose she'd chosen and was choosing still. I thought about the pull-up bar. I thought about 12 reps after he walked away. Not for him. Not for the audience. Just because she wasn't finished. That's all it was. That's everything it was. End of part 3. For the Haji Mirwaises. For the 12 reps nobody counted.